Thank you, Dr. Benjamin and Layla, for giving us ideas about how we can engage with friends and family and our closest circles in our everyday lives. It is so important that we're all engaging on climate every day. I am Reverend Carol Devine, the new director of Blessed Tomorrow, ecoAmerica's faith sector. I am joined today by the Reverend Dr. Jim Antal, Special Advisor to the General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ. Jim has a long list of things that he's done and is doing, but he also happens to be the chair of the Blessed Tomorrow Leadership Executive Council, and he's a friend and a mentor. Jim, before coming to Blessed Tomorrow, I pastored 2 congregations in Kentucky and have worked in many different sectors of my denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. But you have been doing this work as an activist on the front lines of the environmental movement since the very first Earth Day, which has included some arrests, which we won't talk about today. You pastored congregations for over 20 years, have been a professor, started an ecumenical climate organization, have worked in interfaith and secular settings, have authored the great book that I have, Climate Church, Climate World. My goodness, thank you, first of all, so much for your leadership, your activism from my heart. I just thank you on behalf of myself and so many, because you are a model and hero for me and so many other people. And I'm just really honored to be with you today. But let's get started. Jim, I know a congregation that began their involvement in the world of climate work because of money. They needed a new furnace, and when they started investigating and got a more efficient furnace, they saw savings that were unexpected. And so then they started looking for other ways that they might save energy, save money, which also, of course, lowered their carbon footprint and started them on this path. What are other ways that a concerned person or group can introduce their congregation, their community of faith, to climate work?
Well, thank you, Carol, for that kind introduction. In response to your question, there's so many ways a congregation can get started. First, ecoAmerica has lots of downloadable resources that have helped hundreds of congregations to engage the climate crisis. ecoAmerica also offers training programs for climate ambassadors that several denominations and countless congregations have found to be very helpful. Watching a brief video and then engaging in discussion is a great first step. Climate scientist and evangelical Christian Katharine Hayhoe recorded 9 brief videos on Christianity and the climate crisis. They are each 5 to 6 minutes in length, and they can serve as great discussion starters. They're available from tierfund.org under Christianity and Climate Change. It's important also to help your clergy leader recognize that the climate crisis is humanity's greatest moral challenge, and that as a moral and spiritual leader, your clergy must address the climate crisis. Help your clergy leader to realize that whatever social issue your congregation cares about, it might be hunger, it might be homelessness, racial inequality, economic inequity, war, whatever social issue your congregation cares about, the climate crisis is already making it worse. And remember, once your clergy leader begins to offer climate leadership from the pulpit, more and more members of your congregation will begin to engage the greatest moral challenge and opportunity of our lives.
Thank you so much, Jim. I so agree. You know, what congregation doesn't focus on food, for instance, and hunger issues? Those are such great ideas. You know, there's a small congregation here in Kentucky that started and hosts an annual event for their smaller city called Greenstock. And they have at that event only local food, and they have educational booths and activities for children. They have live music, but it is a no waste, no trash event. So it is a model for others as to how folks can do this kind of work. What are other ways that congregations can lead on climate like that?
So, there's so many ways a congregation can lead on climate. I know of scores of congregations who have incorporated into their worship service a 1-minute climate testimony. When a member of the congregation shares something they or their family have done in response to the climate crisis, installed solar panels, called their congressperson, reduced their meat consumption, decided to have only one car, started bicycling to work, stopped banking with Chase or Wells Fargo. Hearing such testimony inspires others to take action. Clergy who are leading on climate provide their congregations with a narrative of engagement, empowerment, opportunity, wonder, and adventure. Engaged clergy can make it clear from their pulpits that restoring God's creation is our generation's unifying calling. Leading on climate involves helping people recognize how racial justice and economic justice are connected to climate justice. It also involves making your house of worship a safe place where people can honestly process their grief over the degradation of the earth we love. Religious tradition teaches us that our grief can serve as a precondition of hope. Of course, any congregation seeking to lead on climate will continue to take step after step to lower their carbon footprint. And remember, it's not just the carbon footprint of the church or the synagogue or the mosque, it's the carbon footprint of the entire congregation that matters. Many congregations are creating gardens on their property. Many are permaculture gardens designed to absorb carbon, and many have invited their community to join them in that gardening project. And finally, leading on climate involves linking up with others. Join with other congregations to sponsor a speaker. Connect with a local chapter of the Sierra Club or 350.org, or check out Bill McKibben's new organization that 20,000 people are already part of. It's called Third Act, and it's for people 60 years old or over.
Oh, that's just awesome. And I would add to that the congregations and houses of faith that I know that are most engaged in this work are thriving. They have energy and passion, and people walk into those spaces and feel the energy and the relevance. So I agree with everything you said. There are so many ways congregations can get involved and can lead. And one area that most congregations, though, are not so active in is advocacy. Many people do not have experience doing that and don't know how. So what are some ways that congregations can enter into and become advocates?
So as a first step, the congregation has to get clear on one thing, that advocacy need not be partisan. Advocacy for and supporting aggressive policies and passage of laws to restore God's creation is not a partisan exercise. It is right and good for the church, the synagogue, and the mosque to advocate for the restoration of God's creation, the elimination of racial inequity, and the transformation of economic inequality, because all three of those are related. Advocacy involves showing up. And it's important for people of faith to show up at marches and rallies organized in support of, for example, solar and wind power, installation of heat pumps in their cities or towns, creation of bike lanes or city parks or gardens, and other creation healing events. Creation-loving citizens can also show up to protest a proposed pipeline or to urge the closing of a gas or coal-fired power plant. Congregations need to be encouraged to vote for restoring God's creation. Here's what many congregations are doing. In the weeks prior to a federal, state, or local elections, congregations are handing out creation care voter pledge cards. The pledge is simple. It reads, I pledge to be a consistent voter, and I will always prioritize caring for God's creation when I vote. Our Faith, Our Vote is the organization that came up with that wording and produces these cards, which many congregations, like, for example, the Church of the Covenant in Boston, have handed out during worship. People have signed them, turned them in the offering plate, and then the congregation has a blessing of those commitments. Here's just one more approach to advocacy. I know of several churches that organize participation in training webinars hosted by the Environmental Voter Project. Once trained, these volunteers would text and call people, encouraging them to vote their values. Again, not a partisan exercise. It's just about loving God's creation and taking action on it.
Oh, that is so good. Thank you so very much. Jim, as you know, in 2 days, we'll be together again on the 4th day of the summit, where we'll be delving even more into how congregations and communities of faith can take action and lead on climate, and literally steps to follow up and become advocates. And so we're so excited for that. And so we look forward to seeing you all as well on day 4. So now we're going to turn the camera and microphone over to Deneen Powell and Anna Puskin-Chevlin, who will expand this conversation even more to how we can engage in our larger communities.